guess I was relieved to know that I had a cancer that was, readily treatable. So, I think I just kind of hung on to that and said, okay, we're good. I'm not going to be that 5% that.
Years after the cameras stopped rolling, the family's story.
If you told someone back in 2009 that a quiet couple from Houston, a business asthma and a neonatologist, both living with a rare skeletal condition, would spend the next decade becoming one of the most beloved families in American reality television history, they probably would have smiled and nodded politely. And then they would have changed the channel. But something unexpected happened. People did not just watch Bill Klein and Dr. Jennifer Arnold. They stayed. Season after season, they came back. And now, years after the cameras packed up and went home, the story of this family has taken turns that nobody, not the producers, not the fans, and probably not Bill and Jen themselves, could have predicted. So today, we are going to walk through all of it. The beginning, the television years, the legal battles, the career shifts, the controversies, and where this family actually stands right now. Because the transformation is real, and it is worth understanding fully. Let's go back to where it all started. Because the origin story of Bill and Jen is genuinely one of the more remarkable things about them, and it has almost nothing to do with television. Both Bill Klein and Jennifer Arnold were born with spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia, a rare genetic condition that affects the development of bones and results in short stature. It is not a condition most people encounter in everyday life, and it is not one that makes childhood easy. Jen underwent 22 surgeries before she even reached adulthood. By the time her story was fully told, that number had climbed past 30 procedures. Bill's own surgical history exceeded 20 operations. These were not people who had simply faced inconvenience. They had spent significant portions of their early lives in hospitals, recovering, adapting, and figuring out how to move through a world that was not designed with them in mind. What makes their story feel almost cinematic is the fact that their paths crossed long before either of them knew it mattered. When both were around 10 years old, they were recovering from surgeries in the same hospital at the same time. Bill would later describe briefly wandering into a young girl's hospital room. That girl was Jen. She remembered nothing of it, which is understandable given that she was heavily medicated and recovering from surgery. They went their separate ways and spent the next 2 decades living entirely separate lives. Jen pursued medicine despite facing discrimination during the college admissions process because of her height. She pushed through and eventually became a neonatologist, one of the most demanding and specialized fields in all of medicine, focused on caring for premature and critically ill newborns. Bill built a career in business, developing a reputation for humor, tenacity, and a kind of relentless optimism that people around him noticed. The second crossing of their paths happened through an online dating platform, and even then, it was not instant. Mutual friends had tried to connect them before without success. Eventually, Jen made the first move, sending what Bill jokingly described as a cold call email. She later admitted she was simply trying to be courageous. Whatever the framing, it worked. The connection that developed quickly became something serious, and Bill eventually boarded a plane to meet her in person, which tells you everything you need to know about how committed he already was. By April 2008, the two were married. That is important context, because it means their relationship was built, tested, and established before any camera crew ever showed up at their door. The foundation was real before the television part began. When the little couple premiered on TLC in March 2009, the reality television landscape was crowded. Audiences had seen plenty of shows built around unusual households or unconventional dynamics, and there was genuine risk that Bill and Jen could be reduced to a novelty. That did not happen, and the reason it did not happen comes down to who they actually were. They were not aspiring entertainers. They were professionals with established careers and a genuine life already in progress. The show did not invent their story. It documented one that was already worth telling. What audiences responded to was a combination of the extraordinary and the familiar. On one hand, viewers were introduced to real challenges that most people had never thought about. Homes required physical modifications. Medical appointments were a recurring constant. The possibility of surgery was never far away. Accessibility was not an abstract concept for this family. It was a daily consideration. On the other hand, the show was fundamentally about two people trying to build a life together, balance demanding careers, support each other through hard times, and eventually become parents. Those themes resonate regardless of any other detail. The path to parenthood was one of the most emotionally significant threads running through the series. Bill and Jen wanted children, but the road was long and painful. Jen experienced multiple pregnancy losses. They explored surrogacy, and that too ended in heartbreak when their surrogate lost the pregnancy. Bill reportedly had to deliver that news to Jen while she was at work, which gives you some sense of how brutal that period was. None of it was manufactured. It was simply what happened to two people who very much wanted to be parents and kept running into walls. In March 2013, they adopted their son Will from China. 7 months later, in October 2013, they adopted their daughter Zoey from India. The speed of those two adoptions surprised people, and it became one of the first genuine debates surrounding the show. Critics wondered whether bringing two young children into the family in such a short window was overwhelming for everyone involved, including the children themselves. Bill and Jen explained that the adoptions had developed on separate timelines. They had been on adoption lists for years. When the opportunity for Zoey arose, they felt they could not step back from it. What looked from the outside like a coordinated plan was, according to them, the result of years of waiting finally converging at once. What viewers did not always see was how complicated those early months actually were. Production cameras were deliberately kept away for approximately 6 weeks after each adoption to allow the children time to settle in without the additional disruption of a film crew. Zoey's transition was particularly difficult. She had spent her early life in an orphanage in India, and the adjustment to an entirely new country, culture, language, and family was significant. Bill and Jen made a deliberate choice to keep those difficult early months largely off camera. Audiences eventually saw a thriving, happy child. They did not see everything it took to get there, and that was intentional. Understanding how the show actually operated requires letting go of the assumption that reality television captures life as it unfolds in real time. In practice, the little couple worked the way most documentary-style series do. Crews were present for some moments, absent for others, and significant events were often recreated after the fact. Birthdays, family dinners, anniversaries, and personal celebrations frequently happened privately first and were then filmed again for the show later. Jen acknowledged this openly. The genuine emotional experience happened the first time. The filmed version was a retelling, not the original. Jen's professional life added another layer of complexity. As a neonatologist working with critically ill newborns, her workplace was a functioning medical environment with strict patient privacy standards. Cameras could not simply follow her to work the way they might on a different kind of show. Gaining access to Texas Children's Hospital required extended negotiations and reassurances that filming would be handled responsibly and would not compromise the institution or its patients. Eventually, a limited version of access was granted, but it was carefully managed throughout. Bill and Jen also maintained clear personal limits about what would and would not appear on television. Jen's cancer diagnosis became part of the show's narrative, but only because she chose to allow it. Bill later made clear that the decision belonged entirely to her. If she had decided she wanted the cameras gone, they would have left. That kind of control over one's own story is rarer in reality television than most people realize, and it says a great deal about how seriously they took the distinction between their public life and their private one. As Will and Zoey grew older, the children themselves became a point of particular thoughtfulness. Reality television has a complicated history with children who grow up on camera, and Bill and Jen were aware of that. While Will and Zoey appeared on the show and were clearly loved by audiences, they were deliberately kept from becoming the central focus of the series. Their school lives, friendships, and daily routines remained largely private. According to Bill and Jen, the children themselves were largely indifferent to the production crews. Camera operators were treated less like fascinating guests and more like temporary obstacles. If a crew member was standing in someone's way, the kids had no hesitation about saying so. That level of normalcy around something inherently unusual is a small but telling detail. The show ran for 12 seasons, which is a genuinely impressive run for any reality series, but its conclusion was not simply a natural ending. Behind the scenes, a significant legal conflict had developed involving LMNO Cable Group, the independent production company behind the series, and Discovery Communications, which owns TLC. The dispute involved serious allegations including accounting irregularities and questions about who controlled the intellectual property tied to the show and others in LMNO's portfolio. Bill and Jen became active participants in that legal landscape. In 2017, they moved to intervene in the broader dispute, arguing that they had not been properly compensated and that they had legitimate claims connected to the show's financial structure. They filed their own claims, which included allegations of breach of contract, fraud, and a challenge to the ownership structure tied to their own names, likenesses, and life story across a decade of television programming. At the center of their argument was a straightforward but significant question: had they been fairly treated in the financial arrangement that made the little couple possible? In May 2020, a federal court issued a ruling that significantly narrowed their case. The fraud-related claims were rejected on the grounds that the evidence did not meet the required legal threshold. The court also denied their attempt to rescind intellectual property rights, which blocked efforts to reclaim ownership or control over the series. A breach of contract claim was permitted to continue in a narrower form, but the larger ambitions of the legal effort had been curtailed. By that point, production had already stopped. The final season aired in 2019, and new episodes never followed. The legal uncertainty had already changed the trajectory before the court ruling settled anything. The family's life after television has been shaped by career decisions that reflect who Bill and Jen were before the cameras arrived and who they have continued to become since. In 2017, Jen accepted a position at Johns Hopkins All-Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida, and the family relocated there. The move represented a significant professional step and also quietly signaled that the show's Houston chapter was closing. By 2021, they had relocated again, this time to the Boston area in Natick, Massachusetts. Jen had accepted a role at Boston Children's Hospital and joined the faculty at Harvard Medical School. Her career had expanded from direct clinical practice into academic medicine, leadership, and teaching. For someone who once faced discrimination during college admissions because of her height, the trajectory is remarkable in the most straightforward sense of that word. Bill continued building Rocky and Maggie's, the pet boutique and grooming business he founded in Houston in 2012, along with the associated product line under the same name. Entrepreneurship had always been his domain, and that continued without the television component attached to it. Public visibility did not vanish when the show ended. Social media became the primary channel through which the family maintained any connection with the audience that had followed them for years. The posts were more controlled, less frequent, and deliberately lower in profile than the sustained exposure of a network series. That choice reflected the same instinct for privacy that had guided their decisions during the show's run. A few moments in the years since the show ended brought the family back into broader public conversation, and they are worth understanding in context. In 2023, a TikTok video featuring Will, who was around 13 at the time, circulated online. The clip showed him participating in a dance trend set to a song with explicit content, and it generated the kind of rapid social media debate that tends to attach itself to public figures' children. People weighed in on parenting decisions and age-appropriate content with a confidence that comes from knowing almost nothing about someone's actual household. The moment faded as quickly as it arrived, which is how most viral moments do. But it illustrated how easily public figures can find themselves pulled into conversations they did not invite. In 2024, Jen shared an update following severe hurricanes that struck Florida, where she still had connections and where she had previously lived. She described assessing damage, checking on family, and navigating the aftermath of the storms. She also disclosed the death of a close friend and colleague during that period. The update was personal and grounded, with none of the produced quality of a television segment. It was a person sharing something painful and real, which in a way felt more like who Jen Arnold actually is than anything a scripted reality narrative could have captured. By 2026, Jen's public presence had shifted further toward the professional and ethical dimensions of her work in medicine. As a neonatologist at Boston Children's Hospital and a faculty member at Harvard Medical School, she became increasingly engaged in public conversations around prenatal counseling, disability-related medical ethics, and the complex decisions that families and medical professionals face together in neonatal contexts. These are serious, consequential conversations that reach far beyond entertainment, and they reflect someone who was always, at her core, a physician first. Looking at the full arc of what this family has done and who they have become, a few things stand out clearly. Bill and Jen never presented themselves as celebrities in the traditional sense, and they have not behaved like former celebrities in the years since the show ended. They built careers before television and have continued building them after. The show was a chapter, not an identity. Their children have grown up with the peculiar experience of having been briefly famous as young kids, and now living in a family that prioritizes privacy and professional purpose over public visibility. Will and Zoey's lives are their own, and the deliberate decision their parents made to protect them from being defined by the show appears, by all available evidence,